Hello, I'm Angel Malone. Welcome to Carolina Classrooms. Today, we're discussing school climate, a term used to measure the safety and comfort of a learning environment. Do students feel safe, welcomed? Do they feel motivated to learn? In an effort to create a positive climate, educators use methods like social emotional learning and trauma-informed teaching practices.
Well, I'm kind of still new with the whole trauma-informed piece. I am a part of a network of teachers, and this is a good resource called Teachers Aligned. And Todd Scholl, he's out of Myrtle Beach, he started this group, and it's not just teachers in South Carolina, but it's educators around the country that are steeped in trauma-informed practices and social workers and things like that. But just being informed with some of the things that students may bring to the classroom. You know, some of the traumas, it could be an incarcerated parent, or the death of a parent, or the loss of income in a home, or homelessness. There's different levels of trauma, and being trauma informed is really important for teachers, just to know some of the signs.
One of the many things I do in my classroom to make sure that my students feel comfortable and welcome is I make sure I'm playing some kind of background music while they're working. When they're coming in the classroom, I make sure that they're engaged in some kind of beginning activity. But more so, I think what's really important, and this is what our principal understands and encourages us to do, is to build relationships with our students. So we stand outside in the hallways in between the exchange of classes. That's usually the time when I get a few hugs and high fives from kids, but it also makes sure that the students know that we're there for them as adults. Also, we make sure to celebrate successes in class, whether it's academic or personal. So we take a few moments in class to make sure we're celebrating those good achievements and that positive news, because with the students that I teach, unfortunately, in a lot of their communities and neighborhoods, they're seeing a lot of negative activity.
Adverse childhood experiences, known as ACEs, serve as a measurement tool to assess past trauma in the lives of youth.
Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as we call them, are traumatic experiences that happen before the age of 18, and research shows that they are linked to many long-term health and social outcomes. And when we think about what ACEs are, they fall under three major buckets. You have things like abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So household dysfunction could be something like witnessing domestic violence in childhood, or not having enough food to eat, or seeing someone in your house that had mental health issues. And so through the science, we know that if these are left untreated, it can actually develop what we call toxic stress in a child. And so this isn't the type of stress that you have when you're sitting in traffic or have a test to take. This is that unrelenting, detrimental stress that can actually change the early childhood development process, and so essentially disrupt a child's biology. And so through that, we know that a child is more likely to cope unhealthily with things like substance use or engaging in unhealthy eating activities, which we then know through decades of public health research is linked to a lot of different things like chronic diseases, or not being able to work, or even mental health issues. And I like to give the metaphor of a paper tiger. So when we think about the idea of stress, one of the most extreme forms of stress that we may feel is when we see a real tiger. And our body is actually programmed to respond to stress for only 20 minutes at a time, especially something that high stress. But imagine that when it comes to someone that has experienced a lot of trauma in their life, or a lot of ACEs, that they're seeing that tiger all the time, to the point that they can't even tell the difference between a real tiger and a paper tiger. And so that's really what's happening when you see kids with a lot of ACEs struggle with school, because what's happening is that their biology and the way that it's been altered through traumatic experiences is colliding with societal expectations of what is considered a good student. And so that's when we either start to see one of two things. It may be that a child is quote unquote acting out, quote unquote being problematic. And I say that because it's really important for us to not label these things as negative things, because we have to remind ourselves that this child is already trying to adapt the best way they know how. And on the other end, you may see a child that completely disconnects and doesn't want to talk to students, talk to their teacher, or respond to maybe the prompt of the day. And so that's really how we see it kind of come out in schools. Our research actually shows that in South Carolina, ACEs are common across populations. Approximately 60% of our population reports at least one or more traumatic experiences in their childhood, and about 12% report 4 or more. We see that this is a common trend across counties, across racial groups, as well as rural versus urban. But we also know that different communities have different contexts. So in some research that we conducted, we actually found that in rural settings, you actually see a lower prevalence of those adverse childhood experiences, but they're also less likely to get the supports they need being in a rural setting. So surprisingly, we actually found the highest prevalence of ACEs in more of our urban areas, places like Richland, Charleston, and the upstate. I want to remind you that ACEs are not destiny. So just because somebody has a high ACE score doesn't mean that they're destined to fail. There's a lot of great research on resilience as well that shows that if someone with a lot of ACEs has the supports that they need, they can actually overcome the effects of those traumatic experiences. And in Darlington, a principal of an alternative school decided to give the ACE study to all of her teachers and administrators and staff. And they actually put the results up of their scores as soon as you walked into that school. And not surprisingly, most of the teachers and staff and administrators had very high ACE scores. But what that showed those students in an alternative school setting was that they can make it because they were being taught and being supported by people that may have grown up just like them in terms of the experiences that they had had, and that they were giving back and they wanted them to be resilient as well. So even doing small things like that can make a huge difference in terms of the culture change of your school.
Patrick Martin and Towner McGill co-founded the Safe Schools Project, a group of teachers and education supporters that advocates for safer schools, smaller class sizes, and access to mental health care.
So the Safe Schools Project is an advocacy organization that seeks to provide safe schools for our students, but through means of mental health supports, small class sizes, social emotional learning woven into the core curriculum, and those means. I was inspired by student Sydney Clinton, who organized the Charleston March for Our Lives.
I originally got involved in gun violence prevention after the Parkland shooting. That next day at school, our fire alarm had gone off during our lunch period, where all 2,400 students are just kind of unattended for in this school, and it's a good opportunity to do tutoring, go to club meetings, get lunch, and kind of have some free time during your day. But after talking about what had just happened in Parkland for the entire morning, the fire alarm went off, and in that split second, the whole idea of what the fire alarm stood for changed, just because of what happened in Parkland and how it was used. So then the next day, there were threats on social media about someone planning on bringing a firearm to my school. It was kind of jarring, and I just kind of felt this weird feeling in my body that this is about to happen here. So then the next day when we had the threats on social media, I was totally numb by that point. I kind of accepted okay, if this is gonna happen at any point, it's probably gonna happen now. And it was pretty scary to feel that way. And when I got home, I left school early. I was just too out of it to really have my time be used in any kind of productive way at school. So I went home that Friday afternoon, and I realized how tense I was, and I shouldn't feel that way in my school. I should feel like I am protected and I'm in a safe place, and I didn't. So that weekend I decided to start the Charleston chapter of March for Our Lives, and I started planning the Charleston March for Our Lives event.
She stood up as a sophomore in high school and led a march to say students deserve safe schools. And so she invited me to come speak at the March for Our Lives. And after that, a huge outpouring of teachers approached me and said, "We liked what you had to say. We think that there's things that can be done." And
my wife is a librarian at Wando High School, and she was up on stage with a group of teachers that Patrick had organized. That's incredibly important for me. I mean, there'll be a day when my wife and my two daughters will probably be in the same school on a day-to-day basis, and I can't be there to protect them and support them, but I want to help do whatever I can and make sure the community is doing whatever it can to support a nurturing learning environment where they're safe and cared for and have the ability to achieve everything that they can there.
I think so often people think about the adverse effects of, or the fear of school shootings. And I think what really we're combating in the classroom is the fear as opposed to the actual reality of it. So when we think about violence in media that we hear about in the news, it can have a serious effect on students. Lockdown drills, arming teachers, these discussions can create anxiety. And so a lot of the Safe Schools Project efforts are designed to help students manage stress, find ways to digest but also filter out the different news that might create that sort of anxiety or stress.
I mean, we have this conversation all the time when we have the gun debate. Is it a gun problem? Is it a mental health problem? It's probably a little of both. But it's hard to argue that we don't have youth growing up that have a lot more problems to deal with, a lot more distractions to deal with than I had even 25 years ago. So how do we support them? We can't keep doing things the same way. And for the most part, I'd say people in the community and legislators are listening. It's just always hard to get everybody on the same page and agree with what's the best way of doing it. And that's why I think it's going to take a variety of strategies and approaches and a lot of different types of involvement.
Thanks to a partnership with Prisma Health, students at Easley High School in Pickens County are being taught mental health first aid. They are learning to recognize the symptoms of mental health problems in themselves and others, and how to access care when it's needed. Students say this training reduces the stigma attached to talking about and seeking mental health care.
The mental health first aid training is basically, it's just like a physical first aid course, except it focuses on mental well-being and mental safety of students.
If you'd asked me 13 years ago or any time before that, well, what do you need to focus on in high schools? I would have given about the same answer. I would have said, test scores, ACT scores, SAT scores, graduation rates. That's the way we have to measure ourselves and what we need to focus on. But about 3 or 4 years ago, it just became apparent to me that wasn't our biggest need. Our biggest need was the mental health of our children. And if you're ever going to achieve those test scores, and the stated goal of South Carolina's high schools is to make students college and career ready. And if we're ever going to be ready for college, if we're ever going to be ready for a career, be ready for life after school, we've got to be able to address mental health. And that's really, in the last couple of years, become a focus of mine.
So I, myself and one of the psychiatrists that I work with, I found a SAMHSA grant, a federal grant, and we wrote that, and we were excited and surprised that we got it. And so it allows me to teach mental health first aid at no cost.
From the first second I heard that we were going to do it this year, I was really interested in being involved because South Carolina has, issues with mental health, as does every state, especially among teens. And it's still kind of like a taboo subject. Some people don't want to talk about it because they're afraid that it'll just make it worse, or it's uncomfortable or a tough subject. But talking about it is the only way that it's going to get any better.
What we teach them is there's 5 steps. There's assess for the risk of suicide or harm. So we talk about what that is. And so if they determine that they feel that's potential, we have very specific criteria for what to do, because we don't want them to feel like they have to fix everything. In mental health first aid, we talk about it being like CPR for mental health. So when you think about traditional CPR, You're providing that life-saving intervention at the moment, but you're not the one who's going to do the long-term stuff. And so we don't want the students to feel like that's their responsibility. So there, are point people in the school. One of the assistant principals, Dr. Cord, would be one of those. Mr. Caller would be one of those. Every participant in this class, whether they're a kid, adult, whatever, they get a resource list of everything you could think of in the upstate, from academic counseling to veteran services to hotline numbers.
It's definitely something that we needed in the school, just because when you look at the statistics, especially in Pickens County in South Carolina, with suicide rates or teenagers dealing with mental illness, they're pretty bad. So it definitely was something that we needed. And I think being able to continue with your education in college or even going into the workforce or going into the military, you really need to be confident in having positive mental health before you can really truly find out who you are and figure out your identity and continue learning, because it's hard to learn when you have all these things clouding your brain with different worries and different stresses. I think it's really unifying, because a lot of students coming from middle school, they're kind of scared because there's a lot of cliques in schools and a lot of different groups, and it's hard to know where you're going to fit in, but this really just unifies the school as a whole, because students they just have a better sense of empathy for each other, and it's just unifying in a way that one student can help another student dealing with something like this.
I had went to a local restaurant, and one of my waiters actually reached out, and he was just we had gotten there and we had sat down and we were waiting on our food to get there, and it took about maybe 45 minutes for the food to come. And then when it finally came, he just came out, he was like, "I'm so sorry. It's been a rough night for me," and just explained his situation. And I actually gave him the mental health leader, the one who's leading all this, her name is Robin. I gave him her contact information, and he actually reached out. And later on, about a month ago, he actually reached back out to me and said thank you for the contact, because without it, he doesn't know where he would have been. So, and I really cherish that story, because it just shows how through one small training, you can impact the lives of others, not even in this school, but out in the community. So, a lot of people are afraid to bring up mental health issues or to talk about just mental health in general. And I think that over the course of this year, it's actually shifted at Easley. I can say that people are more open to say, you know what, I'm not doing too well right now, or I'm not feeling too good, or reaching out to friends and saying, I really need some help right now, or I really need to talk. And I think that's the biggest shift we've seen just this year, and this is our first year doing it. So.
And it just gives a sense that the school cares about you on a personal level. They're going, this is an extra thing, the school isn't required to do this. So these administrators in the school is going extra steps to make sure that we're safe and we feel safe and know how to help others, and they know how to help us. So it's just facilitating a really good dialogue between students and administration, and between students and their peers, that just makes you feel like you're cared for.
Well, I think anytime you empower young people, it improves the environment, and I think that's the key to mental health first aid. You're enlisting the help of your students. You're treating them as your biggest resource, which they are. We have 1,600 children. They're our biggest resource, and so we're enlisting them to help each other. We're empowering them, and they're seen as part of the solution, not part of a problem. And I think anytime you make anyone feel like part of a solution, it makes your culture better.
They are excited to take their new skills into the community as they leave for college, and plans are being made at Easley to expand the training. If you or someone you know needs help, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. At Jackson Creek Elementary, educators employ culturally relevant learning techniques to promote a sense of belonging amongst their students.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven rings.
In culturally relevant learning comes from the idea of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, in which we are trying to bring in the kids' cultures from their home life and bring it to the classroom to make them feel more welcome. It's always important because once the kids feel welcome inside the classroom, that's when the critical thinking and them bringing in their own experiences can shape the entire environment of the classroom. We have a partnership with USC where we have Dr. Eliza Braden and Dr. Susie Long, where they come in and we do professional development. And they do professional development with the whole school. We split with grade levels with early childhood and elementary, but we also have cohorts now with teachers that really want to dig deep and dive into it. We dig deeper into it. So we have a whole school, then we have our cohorts. And in those cohorts, we talk about different lessons. We talked about implicit biases. We talk about just making sure when you walk into a classroom, will the child see themselves? I learned about my students' cultures through student interviews and also parent interviews. I also listen to in regards to what they have to say when it comes to certain conversations. And we like to do family time. And during our family time, the first family time I like to do is, what's your favorite song, and let's sing it. And so we go around and we tell our favorite song and then we sing it, and then while they're singing it, I'm writing down a list so I can know what favorite songs they have, so I can create a class playlist. I always send home a parent survey as well. That could be what are your child's strengths and weaknesses. And a lot of those things from the parents I can even use in rubrics that I may do. For example, if a parent tells me my child really loves to sing, and a part of the rubric could be, they could perform their, project or their paper in regards to them singing it or rapping it. And so just making sure I involve the student and as well as the parents, because the parents may know their child more than I know them. So bringing in their perspective as well. This kind of culturally relevant work isn't just for Black students or Hispanic students, it's for all students. We all benefit from learning about our own cultures and other cultures to grow, to become more empathetic, more understanding, and more conscious about a lot of different things.
I've struggled with, I have an Indian student and I know nothing about Indian culture, but just because I want to include him in our classroom, I will have to study or even speak to his parents about what are some things in your culture that I should talk about or maybe not, touch. And because I want to be sensitive to the culture that I'm teaching about that I don't belong to. But just, I think studying it and speaking to people who are in the culture, even in the building, teachers will come and ask, well, how do I say this without offending anyone? And I think that's just the best way to go about it, just talking to people and asking questions about it, because we'll give an honest answer.
I don't want people to think that this is a different thing than what we do with the standards. We look at the standards, we see how we can connect it with the culturally relevant learning and pedagogies, then we move forward from there. Sometimes it does take more research because you may not find all the different things in like the textbooks we have in the schools, or it may not be a click first Google search that you find. Sometimes you may have to dig. But what I do find is it's also rewarding for myself because I learn new information as well.
We just try to relate what we're doing. We find the standards, then find activities to go with it. For example, we had to do a narrative writing hair piece about a small moment in the kids' lives. And I gave them, the book that we were given, and the kids just really weren't into it. And so I used the book Crown that highlights a boy's hair experience when he went to the barbershop. And I'm like, all of y'all have had hair experiences before. Let's write about hair moments. And it went from 2 sentences to pages of their experience in the beauty and barbershop. So just making it relevant to them and finding, things that they feel strongly about. I have a different bond with my students at this school than I've ever had in my teaching career. I feel like they're more relaxed. They're willing. They'll come in. I'll have a squad of kids every morning coming in, hugging, and good morning, Miss Witherspoon. And it's just it's a good feeling to the kids like being at school, and they can say, they can get a book. Miss Witherspoon, I've seen this before. This happened at home, or I know what that boy's going through because it happened at home. And just knowing that they're relating to what we're actually saying. And I feel if you walk into the classrooms that are really heavy into culturally relevant practices, it's very calming, very family oriented, comfortable, and you can definitely tell that something is being done differently than normal everyday academics. The school as a whole, just when we embrace the children's cultures and they see that we celebrate every culture in the building, I feel like they are more comfortable at school, and they'll go talk to someone if they need help with anything or if they just have concerns. It's more of a family-friendly school, and they feel wanted here and accepted.
And I tell them we're a family. That's one thing I say every day. And not all family members get along. And so we're not going to have beautiful days every day. There's going to be some days when you may be like, Mr. Gibson is not my best friend, or I do not like him right now. But we go to the next day, we talk about it, we work on it, and we move forward from there. And I think with everything that we do and knowing that we care about their culture and their lives, that helps out. That helps them to know that Mr. Gibson is hard on me because he has high expectations for my academic achievement. Not because he doesn't like me, but because the expectations are high for me to succeed. And I think them knowing that we have this high expectations, we want them to be conscious, we want them to be aware of political and social events, allows them to, this climate to become a positive in the school.
Parents, students, and teachers agree. Creating a healthy school climate involves the entire community. Thanks for watching.